mind that also you're a former Justice Secretary, which I think gives it even greater potency. You have said that you want to get back to basics when it comes to law and order, with police spending their time making our streets safe. When an 87-year-old man can be stabbed to death in a mobility scooter, something profoundly wrong has happened. What are you going to do to put politicians back in charge of making our streets safe, perhaps abolishing police and crime commissioners and having direct intervention, targets and performance?
Well, what happened was absolutely appalling and shocking. And we do need to make sure our police are policing the streets rather than policing Twitter and focusing on the right crimes the public are concerned about. See, what I would do is have league tables that compare police forces and how they are performing so they can really be held to account by the public. And I think police and crime commissioners are an important part of that. And they are performing the right role, but at the moment we don't have enough transparency on exactly what the police are doing, and we also need the right leadership in the police, but also the right leadership in our big cities. And frankly, Sadiq Khan has let down London. He hasn't focused on delivering the tough messages to the police. So it does require political leadership. It also requires more transparency for the public, and it requires a change of culture. A change of culture in the police focused on the crimes that people are concerned about.
Would consistent failure in your league table result to a change in leadership of a particular constabulary, a particular area, whether it's Greater Manchester, London or wherever it might be? What sanctions would you introduce? Because league tables are utterly meaningless unless there's some clout behind them.
They're very important. I remember what education was like before we had league tables, and I talked earlier about my school. And the fact is, nobody knew how well schools were performing. They didn't know which school was better. There were rumours that circulated, but there was no hard evidence and data. So I think it does help the police to be held to account by having very clear league tables. And ultimately, yes, if people aren't doing their job properly, they should be removed from the post by the relevant politician.
Thank you very much indeed. On the NHS, again, you're on the record as saying that you want to cut out bureaucracy with fewer levels of management and no more central diktats. Will you go further and have a fundamental review of what the NHS can and cannot do? It is like a religion, like an article of faith in the United Kingdom. People are frightened of criticising the NHS, but the waiting lists, the ambulance times, the delivery is not up to muster at the moment. What would you do about that?
Well, it's absolutely right. There are huge problems with delivery. There are long waiting lists. There are problems with ambulances. It's very hard to get a GP appointment or a dentist appointment. But I don't believe the way to fix that is yet another reorganisation of the NHS. We've been through that before, and all that seems to happen every time there's a reorganisation is we get more levels of management. So what we need to do is actually empower the doctors and nurses on the front line, make sure they are able to deal with the issues the patients are raising, and also that will increase morale and motivation, because what I hear from doctors and nurses is morale is low. And part of that is because people feel like they're being told what to do from Whitehall rather than understanding the situation in their local area and being able to respond to the patient's needs. So that's what we need to enable to happen. I also think we need to look at things like doctors' pensions. We've got a lot of doctors leaving the profession early because of the perverse way that the pensions work. And we also need to look at, we are facing a very difficult situation because we had COVID, so a lot of operations were pushed off. And during COVID, we had extra people that came and helped in the NHS, retired people, people who were formerly nurses or doctors. I want to ask, what can we do now to encourage those people to help out, to help deal with the backlog and to deal with this very difficult situation that we face?
Sure. On the waiting lists, what a lot of people, I suspect several in this room, but many listening as well, were able to do because they had private health insurance, was to make their own arrangements and get it done because they wanted to, and in so doing ease the pressure on the NHS itself. Would you consider, and I put the same point to Rishi Sunak, would you consider offering tax relief to those individuals who say, I'm going to go my own way, I'm going to do my own thing, and you as Prime Minister might just give them 25% back?
So I fully accept, and people have the choice of whether to go private or stay with the NHS. But I wouldn't introduce tax relief. I don't believe that is the answer to the issues that we face at the moment at all. And what I will do is, first of all, deal with these issues of over bureaucracy. And I think we've all seen it. We've all seen the form filling. There are numerous procedures that nurses and doctors I speak to say they shouldn't really have to do, but they're not allowed to use their own judgment. I think we need to trust people on the front line more. But the other point I make, Alistair, is we face a lot of challenges as a country. We face a massive economic challenge of getting the economy growing. We face the challenge of the energy crisis. We face challenges in the NHS. And one thing I would do if I am selected as Prime Minister is I would empower my Health Secretary to deliver. I don't think the Prime Minister can run everything from Downing Street, and I don't think the presidential model works in Britain. So it is about appointing good people who can really grip those issues and listen to people on the front line and make sure we're delivering.
One final point before I move it on to the next subject. If I bolt together your answer on law and order and the NHS, it seems to me that a Truss premiership would take a much closer grip on leadership and what is happening in terms of the Home Secretary telling police forces what to do, and you've just said it yourself, your Health Secretary telling the NHS what to do. Is that a kind of stamp of authority on what would be a Truss premiership?
But it's about leadership, but leadership...
It's also about changing leaders.
But it isn't micromanagement.
Okay.
Because I think the problem is that we've had too many of these central targets in Whitehall. You've had huge layers of management trying to deliver the targets. The people on the front line aren't able to do common sense things because it goes against the central diktat. So, for example, I met a doctor who said he wanted to work weekends. He wanted to go into the hospital, use the operating equipment at weekends, but he was banned by the local NHS trust. And that is just mad. If you've got somebody who actually wants to help patients, but they're not able to because of central diktat, that is getting in the way of delivering a good service for patients. And I think good leadership isn't about micromanaging people, it's about trusting people, holding them to account, and if after a period of time they're not doing a good job, yes, they will need to be replaced.
You've said on immigration, you got big applause when you spoke to it way back at the beginning of the evening, that you support the Rwanda policy, you want to expand it indeed. But everybody in this room and everybody watching and listening knows that it isn't working as a policy. You're clear on what you would do about the Convention on Human Rights if you can't reform it. But isn't it time to consider telling Border Force and the Royal Navy to push back the dinghies?
But that isn't going to fix the problem, because ultimately the people who are travelling to the UK, at the behest of these appalling people traffickers who are trading in human lives, are doing so because they want to live in the UK. And if they get sent back to France, the reality is what we know happens is they try and get into the UK again. So what we need to find is a permanent home for those people. And countries like Rwanda, they don't want a brain drain. They don't want large numbers of people leaving. They actually want people to contribute to the future of their economy. So the way to solve this issue, and I've talked to a number of my counterparts in Europe about this as well, is to find a way of making sure there is a long-term home for people who are involved in illegal immigration. If it is just simply pushing people back and forward across the channel, we are not going to get that long-term solution. And I've been through this with numerous cross-Whitehall meetings. The real issue is, at present, people are able to get on their phone to the lawyers when they get on a plane and evade being sent to Rwanda. And that is the issue we have to fix, and that is about the ECHR.
Okay. A piece that you contributed to back in 2019, Reform, about budget considerations, has caused...
I think that was 2009.
2009.
Alistair.
I do beg your pardon. It is it's a typo. It has caused a bit of a stir.
I always
but
thought you had high quality standards at GBNews, but
we do.
It's not the BBC. You know, you actually get your facts right.
Ms. Truss, enough already. None of this was rehearsed, I promise, absolutely. I'm not going to talk about aircraft carriers or doctors' pay. You've mentioned doctors' pensions already. But what I do want to ask you, and this is totally serious now, is what it tells you, albeit several years ago, about your vision of the state, which I told you in Lee I hadn't heard much of as someone who's watched carefully to this campaign. And I talked to Rishi a moment ago about the Mays lecture and levels of public spending and his vision of the size of the state. Can you define what it means to be a post-Johnson Conservative in the 21st century in terms of the size of the state, the ambition of the state, and the bill the state sends to all of these people as taxpayers to pay for it?
My ambition is for the private sector to grow more than the public sector. And one of the problems I think we've got is there's been an assumption by various members of what I call the economic orthodoxy that Britain is a low-growth country. And therefore, everything is static. We have to make sure that we are taxing people to keep up with public spending. That is not my vision. I believe we can get to much higher growth. I believe we can get to 2.5% growth on average in Britain by unlocking opportunity, unlocking capital in our economy, doing all the things like Northern Powerhouse Rail that will help drive economic growth.
Does big government get in the way of that? Does big government get in the way of it?
Over time, I want the private sector to be bigger compared to the public sector, and I want a sustainable public sector. You know, we have far too many quangos in this country. We have 500 of them. We need to trim it down to size, and we need to make the government efficient. You know, and there are things like there are 5 million people who are currently economically inactive. You know, we need to help those people get into work. That will save the government money, but it will also contribute to the economy. But that isn't something you can achieve overnight. So my long-term vision is for the state to take a smaller proportion of GDP. But the way we get to that is by unleashing growth and doing all the things like the post-Brexit reforms, speeding up infrastructure projects, having low-tax investment zones. That is the way we get to a higher growth country. And ultimately, yes, the government sector will be a smaller proportion of that.
Crucial answer. Thank you very much indeed for that and for mentioning that ratio. I said to Rishi, and I remind you, I don't do gotcha moments, but it's nice, as we did in Lee, to end on...
a gotcha moment.
No, it wasn't a gotcha moment. You eyeballed me and gave a very clear answer about who the cat liked in Downing Street. This one weaves together...
I don't think they know who the cat liked most, but anyway.
Weaves together a serious point, but I hope also... you talked about education in the past and how important it is, and you gave your own lifetime experience right at the very beginning. I'm intrigued to know what you and your husband would say if one or both of your daughters, when the time came up to you and said, you know what, I don't actually want to go to university. What I really want to do is an apprenticeship in X, Y or Z. Would you say hurrah, or would you try and recount your times at Oxford and tell her what a great thing it was?
So I would be delighted, you know, whatever opportunities, you know, either of my daughters take forward. Actually, I think what's most important is what you do, not where you do it. So there are fantastic apprenticeships in areas like engineering and technology that I would be delighted for them to, you know, to go for. Likewise, if they go to university, you know, I am a unashamed, you know, proponent of studying things like maths and physics. So it depends on what course it is, it depends on what apprenticeship it is. But ultimately, you know, you can't tell your children what to do, particularly not... I mean, my oldest daughter is 16, and if I tell her to do one thing, I'm afraid she often just does the opposite. So I'm a practicer of contrarianism. I sometimes lead her down the garden path. I hope... Luckily, she's not listening to this, so she won't hear that. But look, by the time your child is 18... I do think that ultimately they have to drive their own future and make those decisions.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Liz Truss.
Thank you.